Content presented in Cheshire Corners is for educational and informational purposes only. Please consult a legal professional if you have any questions or concerns about the content of this disclaimer, this series, or the legal implications surrounding psychedelic substances in your jurisdiction.
How many of you have experienced microdosing?
Microdosing.
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 I'd never taken any psychedelic before. My experience with drugs is, I would say, more than some people, less than Presidents Bush and Obama.
There's a psychedelic renaissance going on right now.
True believers are eager to share the wonder of microdosing with the world.
My eye was caught by this book by James Fadiman, the Psychedelic Explorer's Guide. And I opened it up to this chapter on microdosing.
And we have a lot of options in terms of the dose ranges.
What about the different doses?
A microdose of a psychedelic, and I'll just use the term microdose from here on, is a 10th to a 20th of the amount one would take if one were having a recreational dose. But we're talking approximately 10 micrograms of LSD, between a 1/10 of a gram and a 4/10 of a gram of mushrooms, and you can take it from there.
A microdose is a small sub-perceptual dose of a drug, any drug.
I feel things from
You
microdose.
feel things from then that means they're not microdose.
But a microdose, when we're talking about psychedelic drugs, is typically a 1/10 dose. If 10 is a microdose, then 100 is a psychedelic dose. So in LSD, the typical psychedelic dose of LSD is 100 micrograms to 200 micrograms if you're really, really aggressive. And a microdose is somewhere between 10 and 20 micrograms.
Yeah.
What do you think a microdose
like
is?
10% of it, like maybe
Like one, like a
0.1 or 0.2.
If you did like a troche that has, let's say, 16 milligrams, I think the lowest I've gone with people is 4. So you could do a troche with 16 milligrams and just take a fourth to get 4 milligrams. That's a pretty standard starting dose for people. And you can always bump it up from there. You can always take more. You can't take less. You can't take 16 and go, oops, I wish I'd taken 8. It's like, well, then you're stuck with it. So you can always take more if it's not enough.
Something that doesn't cause a hallucinogenic experience, you can also kind of come below that dose to psycholytic dosing. And then there's a dose below that that's referred to as microdosing.
Correct. So at the psychedelic dose, when you're under the full influence of that psychedelic dose, you're not having a conversation with your therapist. There's not much kind of back and forth going on. You're probably unable to talk.
Okay.
With a psycholytic dose, the idea there is to lower your defenses so that you can have a more honest, transparent, free-flowing conversation. Kind of loosen you up. Maybe it's like having a beer, right? But you're still feeling something, right? You're hopefully feeling a little more relaxed. But the idea is to facilitate more conversation. And then the microdosing. So those are doses at which you should not feel, if it's dosed correctly, you should not feel anything at all.
But the whole point of microdose, you don't feel anything, right?
True.
You can microdose chocolate. You can microdose LSD. You can microdose marijuana. You could microdose donuts, which I was contemplating as I was standing outside. I can't microdose donuts. You might be able to. I am capable only of the macrodose of the carbohydrate, fat, sugar combination.
My entire career has been with relatively high doses. You know, if it isn't transcendence and you don't vanish as a being and you're not one with all things, I'm not that interested. So what does the universe do for me? It says, why don't you look at the absolute other end, at the most boring use of psychedelics ever created. No mystical visions, no snakes eating you alive, no angelic being saying, you're really special. And everyone else is too, but you can't hear that.
The idea behind microdosing is that it is designed to be sub-perceptual. You don't want to trip. If I said to you right now that I had given all of you a microdose, none of you would really have noticed that. You might just, hence the title of my book and my talk, at the end of the day, you might think to yourself, wow, that was a really good day. But you wouldn't see things burst into bloom. You wouldn't have kaleidoscopic colors drifting through your field of vision. You wouldn't necessarily feel that sense of oneness that with the universe that we're talking about so much over the course of the past few days.
Microdosing, it turns out, makes you feel better. The first question was, why does this little teeny bit have any effect at all? And one of the nice things is there's research. The research is all very clear, as there are no effects below 25 mics. Now, the problem with all that research is that they were looking only for what we would call classic psychedelic effects. Nobody was paying attention to microdoses. Well, curiously, I was going back to what Sandoz had done, because in the good old days...
Sandoz is mostly known as the birthplace of LSD, because it was in the Sandoz Laboratories where Albert Hofmann discovered LSD.
You wrote Sandoz and they sent you some LSD and said, tell us how you're using it. And the government, if you were doing it that way, gave you an exemption to do that, and you were on your way. Sandoz only provided LSD in ampules, that's a little bit of glass with a little bit of liquid, 25 mics, or tablets, 25 mics. No one ever considered that there was anything else below that. Albert Hofmann said on the package, when Sandoz sent it out, it said, before you give this to anyone else, you must use it yourself. Now that's packaging.
But I was still afraid. If you use LSD more than 8 times, you become insane, because that's what they taught us at, DARE. Because I have a mood disorder, I'd always considered the inside of my head to be a very terrifying place. And I don't want to dip into that any more than I absolutely had to.
Or even people who want to try microdosing, but what happens if you take a microdose and it does make your anxiety worse, for example?
So the first thing I did is I called Jim Fadiman out of the blue. In the 1960s, Dr. Fadiman was a psychedelic researcher, initially at Stanford and then at an institute here in Silicon Valley. His area of interest was particularly the effect of psychedelic drugs, specifically LSD, on creativity. And he did lots of research with people who went on to become pioneers in various Silicon Valley businesses like the emerging computer industry, bio researchers, architects, all sorts of people who became pioneers and sort of had a creative spark in what later became the kind of emergent businesses of Silicon Valley. Dr. Fadiman did is he gave them psychedelic drugs, and they asked them to bring intractable problems that they had been working on in their labs, in their offices, to the experimental room, and then they would work on those problems under the influence of LSD.
The nice thing about microdosing is it's been used for thousands of years by indigenous people.
So the first wave of psychedelics was indigenous use across the world for thousands of years.
Did it ever occur to you that indigenous people might have tried small doses, given that they've tried every other level of dose? There's a 1977 article about the Huichol in National Geographic, and it says they consider peyote a major sacrament, and they use it to make it easier to have long, hot walks, to have visions and to see their gods. And I thought, well, those are dosage levels. I started asking people, would you be interested in trying this very low dose? Then I kept asking people, and then people would ask people, and then people who didn't know me would ask people, and I began to get reports from other countries and from people I wouldn't normally meet. And I began to compile the lists of things they said it helped. This is things that were improved by the use of 10 micrograms or slightly less every third day. The kind of protocol I suggested for exploration, and for exploration only, was 1 day on and 2 days off. By the way, that's become, and I read about it, the Fadiman protocol, in which your entire life is now committed to that schedule. I only asked people to do it for a month and said, do what you want after that and let me know.
For the rest of that month, I took microdoses of LSD every 3 days. The idea behind the 3-day structure is that the first day you're under the influence, so to speak, of that microdose, although it's subperceptual. So the second day, peculiarly, most people, I included, feel an even more enhanced sense of well-being, sense of peace. And on the third day, you're kind of your return to baseline. It's a way to evaluate what the other 2 days have been like.
So in June 2015, I started microdosing.
So I began to get reports. And the first reports were, yes, there were effects.
But what LSD does cognitively, from a neurological perspective in your brain, is, to simplify it, it allows different parts of your brain to communicate in unusual ways, in ways that they don't normally communicate.
Low doses of ketamine also improve brain plasticity and BDNP, which helps the brain learn and unlearn. So you're also actually increasing neurogenesis in the brain. You're helping the brain grow new neurons and connections.
So what does it help? Anxiety? Not general anxiety, not if you're just anxious.
If psilocybin microdosing makes somebody feel worse, which is pretty common, especially for folks with generalized anxiety, ketamine might be a really nice tool for those individuals. If I was working with a patient who had generalized anxiety and they were thinking of microdosing, I would actually suggest ketamine microdosing before psilocybin microdosing, because I just see psilocybin microdosing make anxiety worse in not everyone, but a lot of people with anxiety.
But academic anxiety, party anxiety, social anxiety, Asperger's, more ease in social situations. Bipolar, mood elevation during the depression. My favorite in the early ones was no post-Burning Man crash. Creativity, this is technical creativity, coding, machine design, a lot of others. Concussions turn out to often are alleviated in many ways with microdosing. People stopped using or decreased their use of coffee, cigarettes, Adderall, a lot of antidepressants. Ice pick headache, they take about 1 minute, but they can be alleviated in a couple of seconds with a microdose. The long version of that is called a cluster headache. Usually that takes a much higher dose of psychedelics, but a number of people have reported that microdosing solved their clusters as well. In general, when people are microdosing, they improve their health habits. Food choices, exercise, yoga, meditation, learning, languages, advanced math, physical skills, musical instruments, drumming, composition, flying a plane, driving. Trauma, this is not going to eliminate trauma, but it seems to decrease the triggering. Much less procrastination. A few people improved in stuttering, writer's block, and people basically have improved work, amount, discrimination, flow, quality. They also indicate that they're more comfortable with those awful people at work.
And the dogwood had gone into bloom. And I looked at the dogwood and I said to myself, look how beautiful those blossoms are. Now, it wasn't like the blossoms were flying around in space. There weren't kaleidoscopic colors, but it was just that I had been anhedonic for so long. I had been so devoid of the capacity to experience pleasure and experience beauty that I forgot what it was like to look at a beautiful blossom and say, that's beautiful. And suddenly I felt it.
When people are microdosing, their positive emotions go up and their negative emotions decline. Antidepressants, for the few of you they work for, have a partial similar effect. They tend to make negative emotions go down, which is you are much better able to stand being unhappy. Microdoses work differently, which is you not only are less unhappy, but you're more happy.
But more importantly, what I found was a tool to allow me to be receptive to the kinds of therapy and different ways of thinking that would allow me to not control my moods, but rather experience what it was like to not be buffeted by them, to live in this brain and this body and not be so afraid of what was inside my own head.
So the microdosing, so there's actually much, much less research. There, as far as to my knowledge, there hasn't been any really randomized, double-blinded controlled trials that I've seen.
Well, there hasn't been a double-blind study. How do we know that all these thousands of people, it isn't just a placebo? One of our many subjects wrote in and said, I don't care if it's a placebo. I haven't felt this good in 20 years.
Ketamine is more than placebo because we know that it actually can have an anti-inflammatory effect in the nervous system and it can support neuroplasticity. So it's your placebo that's also increasing neuroplasticity, which is like not bad, not too shabby. The beauty of having so many options is that there are so many different kinds of people that are wired in all different ways and go through different chapters of life. So where psilocybin might help with one chapter of life, ketamine might help with another. Big dose, mini dose, microdose, it really varies.
The nice thing about microdosing, if it doesn't work, you stop. If it's unpleasant in any way, you stop. And that's the end of it.